Hello, I'm Richard Nickalls from Lingnan University in Hong Kong. So today I'll be talking to you about our project, which is looking at whether we can use generative AI to give feedback on handwritten student papers. Lots of people to acknowledge on the course, even though it's only a small project. I should acknowledge the help of all the colleagues, tutors and students. Also, I need to acknowledge the help of our student helper, Maria Rogotzina. And also, by the way, there are some images coming up generated by Google AI. So just to give you the background, all of the students in this project were studying on the largest credit-bearing English in-sessional course at my university, University English 2, 1002, which is an English for general academic purposes course that all students at my smallish kind of university must take. So we're very interested in whether we can use generative AI to reduce time spent marking and introduce new writing tasks without increasing tutor workload. And like many of you, I have senior managers at university who are very interested also in whether I could teach the course with fewer tutors. But to give them credit, I guess they must also be interested in what I'm interested in, which is whether it works. And they must be kind of interested because I've got research funding to look at 4 research questions. Today, I'm only halfway through this project. I can only really give you answers for research question 1, and we're looking at whether AI can reliably be used with handwritten student essays, given that it has to use optical character recognition, right, OCR. But just so you know, we're also investigating whether AI can reliably interpret the marking criteria on our course, of course, how we may need to refine those marking criteria for use with AI, whether it really does decrease tutor workload, and we'll also be looking at student and tutors' attitudes to the technology. So like many colleagues, we've adopted at SEAL in Lingnan what the Sydney, Liu and Bridgman term a dual lane approach to assessment, and they published this about 3 years ago, I think. So we can't just remove all of the take-home writing assignments. Those were worth 40% of our course when I arrived. And so it's a bit alarming that students are using AI, but at the same time, we do need to have an authentic assessment that allows students to use technology, right? And I think all EAP courses need to have real-life writing tasks that develop students' AI literacy and teach students how to use the affordances of AI, but avoid using it uncritically, and to train students how to use it appropriately. So like many colleagues across the world, we've kept to this 2-lane approach. And in this lane 2, so here on the right-hand side, you can see that we still have an assessment that actively encourages students to use AI, take their assignments home, use AI as much as they want, but we reduced the weighting of this assessment to 10%, and we added 30% to an oral sort of element of that assessment. That way students can show teachers they genuinely understand the sources they've used. Additionally, to assess the students' language skills and to look at their grammar and lexis more reliably, we introduced a lane 1 controlled writing task, and that prohibits the use of generative AI. So this assessment is now worth 30% of the course grade. And this, of course, it actually allows tutors to look at work the students have actually done themselves without the use of AI. All good, but the problem with the dual lane approach is that we seem to have increased workload somewhat. We had to get students back to kind of handwritten exams, and we found students did quite badly the first time they did that, so we had to introduce a practice test, which squeezes out other things in the syllabus, right? So, and meanwhile, we tutors over the years, we've become quite expert at grading papers electronically, but with handwritten assessments, we can no longer use these affordances of technology. So we can't use computers to annotate work, highlight errors, or look for plagiarism with Turnitin. So on the one hand, tutors really liked the fact that they were looking at real student handwriting, but they were a bit frustrated with the workload and the challenges. So we thought, could we use AI? And wouldn't it be great if we could use AI to reduce tutor workload, not add to it? Now here you can see an image. I asked AI for a picture of tutors relaxing in the staff room as AI does the feedback and grading. Some might say these tutors look like they're in the retirement home after being made redundant by AI. But no, it's genuinely a staff room, and I think, as I'll explain later, I think our jobs are actually safe for the moment. I'll be talking to you about a company called Learnovate who have a product called Pregrade. I have nothing to do with this company, but I went with this product because they offer this one-stop solution, and they have OCR integrated within the kind of one-stop solution. It also has a tutor interface and a student interface. Let me quickly talk you through how it works. So basically the students do their handwritten assessment in class, then the tutor goes to the photocopier room and scans that image into a PDF, feeds that into the Pregrade system. Pregrade uses OCR to digitalize it, and then we fed into Pregrade our marking criteria and with a few model essays, and then in just 30 seconds Pregrade will sends the student an email with their feedback. So here's what the tutor sees. The tutor sees, all of the marks according to the criteria. Here's what the student sees. They get feedback according to all of the rubric criteria, and then they get some markup in grammar and spelling. This is what they call triadic feedback model. I think most feedback in the future with AI will be just students talking to AI, right, one-to-one. But I think there is a case at some parts of the course where the student knows the tutor has seen this, and the student and the tutor can talk together looking at the same feedback. So the headline result, halfway through the first year of the project, we've had 965 students gave consent and have received at least one piece of feedback from the system. I should say in term one, we had an experimental control group approach. We wanted to compare control and experimental groups. We did have a bit of a problem with ethical consent in the first term because we stressed how much it was a pilot project. We had 38 students refuse consent, so do think about that if you're going to do something like this. In the second term, we managed the consent process a bit more smoothly, and only 10 students refused consent, and we actually tried to get all students on the course using it. We dropped the kind of experimental control approach. So let's talk about the research question and how reliably the tool can be applied. So I was amazed that it could read my handwriting and give me feedback, but of course we had to look at this more empirically. So we took a sample of students' work from term one and we analysed what's called the word error rate. Now the literature suggests that an OCR word error rate is normally between 3 and 10%. Just to let you know, the headline rate we got to, so in word error rate terms, it was 95.2%. So, but I think teachers prefer this idea of how inaccurate it is. So it's 4.8% inaccurate. So what does that mean? Is that a problem? I think, that score is mid-range according to the literature. For various reasons, though, it is a problem. I'm going to talk you through some examples of substitution errors, deletions, and insertions now that show you why I don't think this tool could be used for high-stakes assessments. First of all, there's the substitution error. You can see here on the left, the students wrote literacy framework. Pregrade has written as a literary framework. It's just substituted one letter. Not a big problem, right? Students on our course can still get an A with the odd word choice error. Not a big problem, but that was the most frequent error that the system made. Then we have insertion errors. These are a bigger problem. In fact, these are the most annoying error. You can see here the student has made a mistake. They've made an error. They've forgotten the full stop after the APA citation. And yet when I look at the Pregrade digitalization, it's added a full stop. So it's looking for a full stop, so it's added one. And that's a bit of more of a problem. And we don't know why, because sometimes it did this, sometimes it didn't. Other sorts of insertion error, in the first term we had students crossing out work and then the Pregrade system reading it anyway. There was a solution to that. In term two, we found that we could just get students to cross 3 lines through work that they really didn't want the system to read. And here's an example of student work that the system had no problem reading. So there was a solution to that error. Here's another sort of problem that was a bigger problem. Here's the deletion type error. Now here you can see this is what some of my students do. They add the full stop correctly after the citation, but then they think, oh, maybe it's also needed before, and they add a full stop just before the citation. And pre-grade here has it removed that first full stop. It decided on balance it wasn't a full stop. And again, so it's what it's done, it's corrected the student work. A bit of a problem. And again, we didn't know why it did it sometimes, but not others. And here's our biggest concern. What do the best students do at the end of their assessment? If they've managed their time well, they'll have 5 or 10 minutes to check their work and add things to get a higher grade. So this student here, you can see they've added an argument and they've added a citation. And these sorts of things can raise a student's grade from a C to a B or from a B to an A, right? But the OCR system had no idea really how to cope with this. Sometimes it added it in the right place, but more likely, more times than not, it added this insertion in completely the wrong place. And tutors would have had no problem. I would have had no problem working out what that insertion meant. So there we go. So I think we can already see an answer to the first research question. In its current state, based on its current limitations, I don't think the system can reliably grade high-stakes assessments. I think some of the errors it's making would unfairly reduce students' grades. However, even if it can't be used for high-stakes end-of-term assessments, I do see a lot of potential for this technology. Could this technology still be used for these scaffolding writing steps that we want to use throughout the course to build students up to the end-of-term assessment? Could they be used just for in-class tasks? Could this technology be helpful in some sort of diagnostic test? So however negative I've sounded with these results, we're going to carry on with the other three research questions. And we are quite excited by the next steps. We've already seen it has some potential. We're going to be introducing a diagnostic test in September. For various reasons, we haven't been able to carry out a diagnostic for the last few years due to resource constraints. But this technology will allow us to reintroduce that in week 2. And not only will students get some good results benchmarked to IELTS grammar and Lexis descriptors, tutors will be able to see those results, and they'll be able to, see the students that they should, they might need to support the most in their class. We're going to carry on using the tool to offer students formative assessment for the practice test. We're going to ask tutors to give global feedback, but reduce tutor workload by getting the AI to do the hard work of the more detailed feedback. But then again, we've got to stress to students that it's not used for grading. And now I'm not going to go too much into the student and tutor feedback in today's presentation, but spoiler alert, students are very worried that we are using it. No matter what we say, they think we are secretly using it to grade their work. So I think there's some work to be done in communicating to the students that we really aren't using it for end of term assessments. And we have to explain to them we're using it for formative processes, and yes, the pre-grade will make, the AI will make 1 or 2 errors in the optical character recognition. However, and obviously we're going to carry on with our research project. Despite these issues with the OCR, I'm going to be comparing the pre-grade grading with the grading of 3 other tutors and see if they're consistent in their approach to the criteria and grading. And we will be looking more into, we've already carried out these surveys, we've done lots of focus groups, and we just need to crunch the numbers now and look more in a more detailed way at student and tutor attitudes to it. So final thoughts, I want to say I am actually very glad we have this dual lane of assessment approach on my course. I think it's the only valid way to deal with AI. I'm also very glad that I found tutors are still required, and senior management at my university can't suddenly make us redundant because of AI. I think we can, with that dual lane assessment approach, we can now look for ways generative AI can make tutors' life easier. Here are my references. I did promise Mark at Pregrade. I honestly have nothing to do with this company, but Mark at Pregrade, he said he'd be very happy to talk to any tutors who want to talk to him.